The rain drummed against the windows of the upscale coffee shop in downtown Los Angeles, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the bustling street outside. Steam rose from expensive espresso machines while well-dressed patrons tapped away on their laptops, conducting business deals worth more than most people made in a year. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of freshly ground coffee beans and the quiet murmur of important conversations. In the corner booth sat a man who seemed oddly out of place among the designer suits and luxury handbags. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and he wore a simple black t-shirt beneath a worn leather jacket that had seen better days. His jeans were faded, and his boots showed signs of countless miles walked. To the casual observer, he might have been a delivery driver taking a break, or perhaps a struggling artist nursing a single cup of coffee to stay warm. At the adjacent table, Marcus Wellington III adjusted his Rolex Submariner and smoothed down his $1,000 silk tie. His Italian leather shoes gleamed under the cafe's ambient lighting, and his perfectly tailored suit spoke of old money and newer ambitions. Marcus had built his reputation as a talent agent representing some of Hollywood's most demanding stars, and his philosophy was simple. Image was everything, and weakness was unforgivable. Marcus glanced over at the man in the corner booth with barely concealed disdain. Probably another wannabe actor, he muttered under his breath to his assistant, who nodded obsequiously. Look at him. Can't even afford decent clothes. This city is full of dreamers who don't understand that success requires standards. The man in the leather jacket seemed oblivious to the judgment being passed upon him. He sat quietly, occasionally glancing out the rain-streaked window with an expression that suggested he was somewhere else entirely, lost in memories or contemplation. His hands wrapped around a simple ceramic mug, and there was something almost meditative about his stillness. What Marcus couldn't have known was that this unremarkable-looking man had once been told by a wise teacher that the greatest performances happen not on stage, but in the quiet moments when we think no one is watching. Those words had shaped a career that would eventually span decades and touch millions of lives. As the afternoon wore on, the coffee shop began to empty. Marcus was wrapping up a phone call about a multi-million-dollar film deal when he noticed the man in the corner booth stand up and walk toward the window. Outside, huddled beneath a small awning across the street, was a figure that would have been easy to overlook, an elderly man wrapped in layers of tattered clothing, his gray hair matted and unkempt, holding a cardboard sign that was too distant to read clearly. The man in the leather jacket pressed his palm against the cool glass, his expression shifting from contemplation to something deeper, more complex. Recognition, disbelief, and then, unmistakably, profound sadness. Marcus watched with growing irritation as the stranger continued to stare out the window. Probably planning to ask for money, he said loudly enough for others to hear. These bleeding hearts never learn that handouts just enable more problems. But instead of walking away or pulling out his wallet for a quick donation, the man in the leather jacket did something unexpected. He walked directly to the barista station and began speaking quietly with the manager. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he watched as the manager's expression changed from professional politeness to surprise, then to something approaching awe. Minutes later, the man in the leather jacket was pushing through the coffee shop's heavy glass door, stepping into the rain without so much as pulling up his hood. Marcus craned his neck to watch as the stranger crossed the busy street, seemingly oblivious to the honking cars and the downpour that was quickly soaking through his clothes. The homeless man looked up as the figure approached, his eyes widening in what appeared to be recognition, followed immediately by shame. He tried to shrink further into the shadows of the awning, but there was nowhere to hide. "Roberto?" The voice carried across the street, barely audible above the traffic and rain, but filled with such warmth and disbelief that it made Marcus lean forward in his seat to try to hear better. The homeless man's shoulders began to shake, and even from this distance it was clear he was crying. The man in the leather jacket knelt down on the wet pavement without hesitation, placing his hands on the older man's shoulders, and for several minutes they simply held each other while the rain continued to fall around them. Marcus felt his jaw clench with annoyance. Performance art, he scoffed to his assistant. Probably staging some kind of social media stunt. These actors will do anything for attention these days. But as he continued to watch, something about the scene struck him as uncomfortably genuine. The man in the leather jacket wasn't looking around for cameras or audiences. He wasn't posing or positioning himself for the best angle. He was simply present, completely focused on the person in front of him, as if nothing else in the world mattered. The conversation across the street continued for nearly 20 minutes. At one point, the man in the leather jacket pulled out his phone, not to take a selfie as Marcus expected, but to make what appeared to be a series of increasingly animated phone calls. With each call, his gestures became more emphatic, his voice more insistent, though the words remained inaudible from the coffee shop. During the fourth or fifth call, something seemed to break through. The man's posture relaxed, and he turned back to the homeless man with what looked like good news. They embraced again, and this time, both men were clearly emotional. "Disgusting," Marcus muttered, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Public displays like that are so undignified." His assistant, who had been watching just as intently, ventured quietly. "It seems like they might know each other, sir. The way they're interacting, it looks personal." Marcus was about to dismiss this observation when he noticed other people on the street had begun to stop and stare. A small crowd was forming, and their expressions weren't those of people watching a performance. They looked moved. Some even appeared to be crying themselves. A young woman with her phone out had initially appeared to be recording, but she had lowered the device and was simply watching with her hand over her heart. An elderly couple walking by had stopped under their umbrella, the woman clutching her husband's arm as they observed the scene unfolding. The man in the leather jacket stood up and gently helped the homeless man to his feet. Together, they began walking back toward the coffee shop, the younger man's arm protectively around the older man's shoulders. As they grew closer, Marcus could make out more details of the homeless man's appearance. The deep lines carved by years of hardship, the way he moved with the careful, painful gait of someone whose body had endured too much, and eyes that held a spark of intelligence and dignity that his circumstances couldn't quite extinguish. The coffee shop door chimed as they entered, both men dripping wet but seemingly oblivious to their condition. The entire cafe fell silent, all pretense of important business calls and urgent emails forgotten, as everyone watched this unlikely pair make their way to an empty table. "2 coffees," the man in the leather jacket said to the approaching barista, his voice carrying a subtle accent that suggested Canadian origins. "And could we get some towels? Also, do you have any of those sandwiches left? The good ones with the roast beef?" "Of course, sir," the barista replied, her voice filled with an unusual warmth. "Right away." As they settled into their seats, the homeless man seemed overwhelmed by the simple act of being inside, warm and dry. His hands shook as he reached for the cup of coffee, and when he took his first sip, he closed his eyes as if trying to memorize the sensation. "I can't believe it's really you," the homeless man said, his voice rough with emotion and years of hard living. "After all these years, Roberto Salvatore, remember? From the community theater on Melrose? You were just a kid then, so eager to learn, asking a million questions about Stanislavski and method acting." The man in the leather jacket smiled, and for the first time, Marcus caught a glimpse of something familiar about his features, though he couldn't quite place it. "How could I forget, Mr. Salvatore? You changed my life. Those Tuesday night workshops, the way you made us dig deep into our characters' motivations, the way you taught us that acting wasn't about pretending to be someone else. It was about finding the truth in ourselves." Roberto laughed, a sound that was equal parts joy and heartbreak. "Look at me now, teaching the truth. What a joke." "Hey," the younger man said firmly, leaning forward. "What happened to you doesn't change what you gave to all of us. Do you know where Tommy Chen is now? He's directing films in Seoul. And Sarah Martinez? She just won a Tony Award. We all carry pieces of what you taught us." Marcus found himself leaning closer, straining to hear every word of their conversation. Something about the way the man spoke, the cadence of his voice, was nagging at him. "But I lost everything," Roberto continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The theater, my apartment, my dignity. The medical bills after Maria got sick. I couldn't save her, and I couldn't save anything else either. The man in the leather jacket reached across the table and took Roberto's weathered hands in his own. You didn't lose everything. You're still here. You're still the man who taught me that every character has a story worth telling, including your own. I've been living on the streets for 3 years, Roberto admitted, shame coloring his words. 3 years of being invisible, of people looking right through me like I don't exist. Well, you're visible now, the younger man said with quiet intensity, and I see you exactly as you've always been, my teacher, my mentor, one of the most important people in my life. Marcus watched as the man in the leather jacket pulled out his phone again and began making another series of calls. This time, Marcus could catch fragments of the conversations. Need a furnished apartment, somewhere safe and clean. Yes, I'll cover the deposit and first year's rent. Medical coverage too, full comprehensive. No, this isn't negotiable. Looking for someone with extensive theater experience, teaching background, community outreach program. When can he start? Tomorrow would be perfect. Complete wardrobe consultation, casual but dignified. Yes, send the bills to my accountant. With each call, Roberto's expression shifted from disbelief to hope to something approaching joy. The transformation was remarkable, as if the simple act of being seen and valued was literally bringing him back to life. You can't do all this, Roberto protested weakly. It's too much. I don't deserve. Stop, the younger man interrupted gently. When you taught us about character motivation, what was the first thing you always said? Roberto smiled through his tears. Every character wants something, needs something, and deserves something. And what do you deserve, Roberto? I deserve respect, dignity, a second chance. Exactly. It was at that moment that a young barista approached their table, clearly nervous but determined. Excuse me, she said quietly, I don't mean to interrupt, but are you Keanu Reeves? The coffee shop fell completely silent. Marcus felt his blood run cold as the pieces suddenly clicked into place. The familiar voice, the understated presence, the quiet charisma. He had been sitting 3 feet away from one of the most beloved actors in Hollywood and had completely missed it. Keanu looked up at the barista with a gentle smile. I am, but right now I'm just having coffee with an old friend. Is that okay? The barista nodded enthusiastically, her eyes shining. Of course, I just wanted to say, my mom loves your movies. She always says you seem like a really good person. Your mom sounds pretty smart, Keanu replied. Tell her I said thank you. As the barista walked away, practically floating with excitement, Marcus felt the full weight of his earlier judgment crashing down on him. Here was a man who could afford anything, do anything, be anywhere in the world, and he had chosen to spend his afternoons sitting with a homeless man, treating him not as a charity case, but as someone worthy of respect and love. Roberto was staring at Keanu with wonder. You're really him. You're actually Keanu Reeves. That sweet kid from my Tuesday night classes became this? Keanu shrugged with characteristic modesty. I got lucky, but more importantly, I had good teachers who taught me that success isn't about what you achieve, it's about how you treat people along the way. I taught you that? You taught me that the most important scene in any story is the one where the character chooses who they want to be. You said that moment defines everything that comes after. Marcus watched as other patrons in the coffee shop began to approach their table, not for autographs or selfies, but simply to shake Roberto's hand after Keanu quietly introduced him as one of the finest acting teachers Los Angeles has ever had. Each interaction seemed to restore another piece of Roberto's dignity, and Marcus could see the man physically straightening, his voice growing stronger with each conversation. When a local theater director happened to recognize Roberto and began discussing upcoming workshop opportunities, Marcus realized he was witnessing something far more profound than a celebrity good deed. This was a master class in human dignity, in seeing people not for what they appeared to be, but for who they truly were. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Marcus found himself unable to leave. He watched as Roberto's transformation continued, not just in his appearance, as Keanu had quietly arranged for him to freshen up and change into clean clothes from a nearby shop, but in his entire demeanor. The broken man who had been invisible on the street corner was revealing himself to be articulate, intelligent, and deeply passionate about his craft. "You know what the funny thing is?" Roberto said as they prepared to leave. "I never stopped teaching, even on the streets. There are other people out there, lost souls trying to survive, and sometimes we'd gather in the shelters and I'd run little workshops, acting exercises to help people process their trauma, find their voices again." Keanu's eyes lit up. "That's it. That's your program." "What program?" "The one you're going to develop for the community center. Drama therapy for people experiencing homelessness. I'll fund it, but you'll run it. You'll be reaching people who need exactly what you have to offer." As they stood to leave, Marcus found himself doing something completely out of character. He approached their table, his usual confidence replaced by genuine humility. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation. Mr. Salvatore, my name is Marcus Wellington, and I work in talent representation. I've been thinking, if you're going to be doing community outreach, you might need someone to help coordinate with local media, maybe arrange some publicity to bring attention to your program. I'd like to offer my services, pro bono." Roberto looked surprised, but Keanu smiled knowingly. "That's very generous of you, Marcus. What made you want to help?" Marcus felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Honestly, I spent this entire afternoon judging you based on your appearance, making assumptions about who you were and what you were worth. Watching the two of you together, it made me realize how much I've been missing by only seeing the surface of things." Keanu extended his hand. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize we've made them." As the three men walked out of the coffee shop together, Marcus noticed that several other patrons were following at a respectful distance, clearly moved by what they had witnessed. A few were wiping away tears, and others were already pulling out their phones to make donations to local homeless shelters. Outside, Roberto turned to Keanu with tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. You've given me back my life." Keanu shook his head gently. "Roberto, you never lost your life. You just lost sight of it for a while. All I did was help you remember who you've always been." As they parted ways, Roberto to his new apartment, Keanu to his motorcycle parked around the corner, and Marcus to his luxury car with a completely different perspective on success, the rain had stopped, and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds. 3 months later, Marcus found himself sitting in the same coffee shop, but this time he was there for a very different reason. Across from him sat Roberto Salvatore, now clean-shaven and wearing a simple but dignified sweater, discussing the details of a documentary about his drama therapy program. The project had been Keanu's idea, but Roberto was the star, and Marcus was producing. "The hardest part," Roberto was saying to the documentary crew, "isn't teaching people to act. It's teaching them to believe they're worth being seen. Everyone has a story, everyone has value, but society teaches some of us that we're invisible." Marcus nodded, thinking about how invisible he had tried to make Roberto that first day, how close he had come to missing out on knowing one of the most remarkable people he had ever met. "What changed for you?" the interviewer asked Marcus. "Why did you want to get involved with this project?" Marcus glanced over at Roberto, who smiled encouragingly. "I learned that real success isn't about the image you project. It's about the connections you make. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and understanding that everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. Roberto taught me that, and so did Keanu, though they probably don't even realize it." The documentary, when it was released, would go on to win several awards and inspire similar programs in cities across the country. But for Marcus, the real victory had happened that rainy afternoon in a coffee shop, when he learned that the most important performance of his life wasn't about impressing others. It was about being present, being humble, and being willing to see the extraordinary in what he had mistaken for ordinary. Roberto's program grew beyond anyone's expectations. The community center where he taught became a beacon of hope for people experiencing homelessness, offering not just drama therapy, but job training, counseling, and most importantly, a place where people could rediscover their dignity and worth. Keanu, true to his character, remained quietly involved, occasionally dropping by the center to participate in workshops or simply to check on Roberto's progress. He never publicized his involvement, never used it for promotional purposes, and always deflected credit back to Roberto and the participants who were doing the real work of transformation. Years later, when reporters would ask Roberto about that day in the coffee shop, he would always say the same thing. Keanu didn't save me. He reminded me that I was never actually lost. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't money or opportunity. It's the simple act of seeing them as they truly are. And Marcus, who had built his entire career on the assumption that image was everything, learned that the most powerful images were often the ones that revealed truth rather than concealing it. The man in the worn leather jacket had taught him that real star quality had nothing to do with designer clothes or perfect lighting. It came from the choice to treat every person you encounter as if they matter, because they do. The story of that rainy afternoon became something of a legend in Hollywood, though most people got the details wrong. They focused on the celebrity aspect, the dramatic rescue, the feel-good ending. But for those who were actually there, the real lesson was simpler and more profound. That kindness is a choice we make in every interaction. That dignity is something we can give to others simply by recognizing it in them. And that sometimes the most important thing we can do is slow down enough to really see the people standing right in front of us. In a world that often moves too fast to notice the humanity in each other, three men learned that afternoon that connection, real, authentic human connection, is perhaps the most valuable thing we can offer or receive. And sometimes, just sometimes, that connection can change everything.